It's 11:35 p.m. A teenage girl lifts a payphone receiver outside a closed convenience store somewhere in rural Alabama. She calls her mom. Her voice is calm normal. A little sheepish because she got lost and it's late and she knows her mom is probably worried. She says they have directions now. She says they're on their way home. And then, before she hangs up, she says 3 words. Mom, I love you. Carol Roberts heard those words. She held onto them that night, thinking her daughter would walk through the door any minute. She is still holding on to them today, because that was the last thing Tracie Hawlett ever said to her. By the next afternoon, Tracie and her best friend JB Beasley were found in the trunk of a car less than a mile from that payphone, each with a single gunshot wound to the head. This is their story. Welcome back to Reopened Records. I'm going to tell you right now, this episode is one of the most layered, most haunting cases I have ever covered on this channel. And I've covered some dark ones, because this isn't just a murder case, it's a 20-year cold case. It's a DNA sample that sat in a laboratory for 2 full decades without a match. It's a killer who lived in the same community as his victims, going to work, attending church, raising a family, while 2 mothers grew old waiting for answers. And it's the story of how a single breakthrough in science finally gave those mothers what 20 years of traditional investigation could not. We are going all the way through this one, start to finish, from the night of July 31st, 1999, to a courthouse in Alabama in April 2023. If this is your first time here at Reopened Records, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now, because we don't just tell crime stories here. We follow them all the way to the end, every lead, every dead end, every verdict. And before we go any further, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. I want to know who's staying up late with me on this one. To understand this case, you have to understand the world these 2 girls lived in. It's the summer of 1999. America is in the middle of the most prosperous stretch of the entire decade. The dot-com boom is making millionaires out of people who barely understand the internet. Bill Clinton is still in the White House, freshly survived an impeachment scandal, and somehow more popular than ever. The Backstreet Boys and TLC are on every radio station, in every car, in every bedroom across the country. It is, by most measures, a good time to be alive in America. And nowhere does that summer feel more like summer than in the small cities of the Deep South, where the heat arrives in June and refuses to leave until October, and where the biggest concerns for most teenagers are which parties to go to and how late they can stay out before their parents start calling. Dothan, Alabama, population around 60,000, tucked into the southeastern corner of the state, right where Alabama nearly touches both Florida and Georgia. It's what locals call the Wiregrass region, named for the wiry native grass that covers the flatlands. It's a town where people grow up knowing their neighbors' names, where you wave at strangers on the road without thinking about it, where summers for teenagers meant backyard parties, late-night drives down the long, straight roads of Houston County, and the kind of freedom that came from living somewhere that felt genuinely safe. JB Beasley was about to turn 17. Born July 31st, 1982, JB was exactly the kind of daughter parents never had to worry about. She was an excellent student, a member of the Junior Honor Society, a cheerleader. Smart, focused, well-behaved, someone who already knew what she wanted from life. Her mother, Cheryl Bergen, described her daughter as a beautiful gift. Her best friend was Tracie Hawlett. The 2 girls had been inseparable since middle school. The kind of friendship where you finish each other's sentences and show up without calling first. If JB was somewhere, Tracie was almost always right beside her. On the night of July 31st, JB's birthday, that was exactly where Tracie was, right beside her best friend, on what should have been the most fun night of the year. Around 10:05 p.m., JB and Tracie climbed into JB's black Mazda 929 and pulled out of Dothan. They were heading to Headland, a small town about 10 miles north, for an outdoor birthday party. It was a warm Alabama night, the kind of night that feels endless when you're 16 and 17, with music on the radio and your best friend in the passenger seat and the whole summer still stretching out in front of you. They never made it to the party. At some point along the way, they made a wrong turn, then another. Before they realized what had happened, they weren't heading toward Headland anymore. They were heading in completely the wrong direction. They ended up in Ozark, a town more than 20 miles to the northwest of Dothan, the opposite direction entirely. If you've never gotten lost on the back roads of rural Alabama at night, let me paint it for you. There are no landmarks, no familiar street signs, just flat, dark highway stretching in every direction and the sinking feeling that you have absolutely no idea where you are. JB and Tracie pulled into the Big Little Store and Chevron gas station at 763 East Broad Street in Ozark. The store had closed at 11 p.m., but they got lucky. A woman named Marilyn Merritt had stopped by with her daughter to grab some sodas. JB and Tracie got out of the car and asked her for directions back to Highway 231, the road that would take them home to Dothan. Merritt gave them clear, simple directions. She would later recall that JB's car was spotless. The two girls were neat, clean, and composed. There was nothing unusual about them, no signs of fear, no signs of distress, no red flags of any kind. Just two teenagers worried about being late getting home. At the public payphone on the right corner of the store's front, the one I mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, Tracie picked up the receiver and called her mother. Tracie's voice was normal, calm. She told her mum they had gotten a little lost, but they had directions now and were on their way home. And then before she hung up, 3 words: "Mom, I love you." Marilyn Merritt stood in the parking lot and watched the black Mazda 929 pull out, turn right toward the main road, exactly as instructed, and disappear into the darkness. That was the last time anyone saw JB Beasley and Tracie Hawlett alive. Here's something the security camera inside the Big Little store captured that night. Something nobody thought much about at the time, but that would haunt investigators for years. At the exact moment Tracie was on that payphone with her mother, a small white pickup truck was parked at the gas pump outside. No transaction was recorded at that pump. No one recognized the truck. No one saw the driver. For many years after, that blurry image of a small white pickup, license plate unreadable, driver invisible, would remain one of the most unsettling unanswered questions in this entire case. On the morning of August 1st, 1999, both families reported the girls missing after they hadn't come home all night. That same morning, a black Mazda 929 was found parked on Herring Avenue in Ozark, less than a mile from the payphone Tracie had used the night before. Ozark police were called to check it out. On the surface, it looked like an abandoned vehicle. No collision damage, no signs of being forced off the road, just a car sitting on the side of the street. But the closer you looked, the more wrong it felt. The car was covered in mud, the gas tank was nearly empty, the driver's side window was rolled down a few inches. The doors were unlocked. JB's driver's license was sitting on the dashboard. Both girls' wallets were still inside, cash, jewelry, and credit cards all untouched. Robbery hadn't happened here. The only thing missing from that car was JB's keychain, a small chain with white and black letter blocks that spelled out, "Hard to get." Ozark police identified the Dothan plates and contacted Dothan police. A Dothan investigator was sent out with the plan to have the car towed. The vehicle had been sitting there since 8 a.m., 6 hours passed. 6 hours came and went, and no one opened the trunk. It wasn't until nearly 2 p.m., while waiting for the tow truck, that the Dothan investigator noticed something. The trunk could be opened from a lever inside the car. Without a key, he pulled the lever. JB Beasley and Tracie Hawlett were inside, each with a single 9mm gunshot wound to the head. The girls were still fully dressed. No obvious signs of a physical struggle. But their bodies told a different story. Tracie had been shot in the temple. She had scratches on her arm, briars stuck to her pants, and her brand new New Balance shoes bought just the week before were caked in mud. Both girls' pant legs were wet up to the knees. They had walked through wet ground or damp grass somewhere before they were killed. From the way the bodies were positioned, it was clear Tracie had been placed in first, JB placed in after her. A 9mm shell casing was resting on Tracie's leg. They had not been killed on Herring Avenue. This was simply where the killer had left them. In the immediate aftermath, investigators worked through the initial evidence. The autopsy concluded there were no signs of sexual assault, no alcohol, no drugs. Robbery was ruled out immediately. Everything of value was still in the car. The community of Dothan was in shock, not the kind of shock that fades, the kind that settles in and refuses to leave, the kind where you look at the people around you on the street and quietly wonder, which one of you could have done this? 2 17-year-old girls, a birthday night, a trunk on the side of the road. That image haunted the Wiregrass region in a way that no words could fully describe. A reward was raised. People demanded answers. Police were under enormous pressure. And then, more than 2 months after the bodies were discovered, the Alabama State Crime Lab released a finding that completely changed the direction of the investigation. Found on JB Beasley's bra, panties, and skin. Additionally, an unidentified palm print was collected from the inside of the trunk lid. District Attorney David Emery stated it plainly. This was a sexual crime, or at the very least it stemmed from a sexual act. Finding the owner of that semen sample would mean finding the killer. That theory was correct, but finding him would take another 20 years. I need you to stay with me right now, because what comes next is the part that took 2 decades to unravel. And every twist, every dead end, every year that passed, it all matters. Don't go anywhere. Exactly 1 month after the bodies were discovered, a man walked into the Ozark Police Department on his own. September 1st, 1999. His name was Johnny William Barentine, 28 years old. A part-time mechanic who lived less than a mile from Herring Avenue, less than a mile from where that black Mazda had been found. He sat down and told investigators he knew something about the case. The interrogation lasted 4 hours and was fully recorded. In those 4 hours, Johnny Barentine told 6 different versions of what happened that night. Version 1, he saw a black truck speeding away from the Herring Avenue area. Version 2, he gave a ride to a stranger, a man with tattoos all over his arms, who had come by the big little store that night. By the time he reached his 6th and most detailed version, the story had grown into something far more elaborate. He claimed the tattooed man had gotten into JB and Tracie's car in the parking lot, told Barentine to follow them. They drove to Herring Avenue. The man pulled the girls out of the car. Barentine heard 2 gunshots. The man came back, and Barentine drove him away from the scene. Police arrested Barentine immediately. The press covered it heavily. The entire community exhaled. They thought it was over. They thought the case was solved. But problems appeared almost instantly. In every single one of his 6 versions, Barentine never once mentioned any sexual activity, even though semen on JB was physical proof that it had occurred. The neighbor Barentine identified as the tattooed man had a solid, verified alibi for the entire night of July 31st. And when the DNA results came back, they did not match Barentine. They did not match the neighbor. Barentine was brought before a grand jury. There he admitted the truth. He had made up the entire story, every version, every detail, every name. He hadn't seen anything that night. He knew nothing about what happened to JB and Tracie. He had fabricated the whole thing to claim the reward money. The grand jury declined to indict him. Barentine was released. And the case didn't just go back to square one, it was worse than square one. Because police had spent months and significant resources chasing a story that one man had invented for money. The real investigation had been stalled. The real killer had gained more time. And when the smoke cleared, all that remained was exactly what they had before. A semen DNA sample that matched no one. Investigators kept pushing. There was a man from Michigan who had been at a party near Herring Avenue on the night of July 31st. He could not account for 3 to 4 hours that night, and he had left Ozark just a few days after the bodies were found. Investigators flew to Michigan to question him. Once, then a third time, DNA no match. There was a man from Mississippi who had been staying in Ozark around the time of the crime and disappeared shortly after. He was tracked down, brought in, tested. No match. The small white pickup truck on the big little store security camera, blurry footage, unreadable plates, unrecognized by anyone in the community, was never identified. Its driver was never found. Every lead ran into a wall. Every suspect who was cleared left another gap in the investigation. I want you to sit with something for a second. The only piece of evidence that still had real value in this entire case, the only thing that could definitively point to the killer, was that semen DNA sample sitting in a laboratory. And the person who left it had no criminal record, no prior arrests. No reason for his DNA to be in any government database anywhere in the country. He wasn't hiding, he wasn't running. He was simply living, going about his life, in the same region, breathing the same air as the families of the girls he had killed. And every year that passed, every dead end, every cleared suspect, it just meant more time for him. What time is it where you are right now? Because I want you to really think about that. About what it means to wait for justice. Not for a year, not for 5, but for 20. That's what came next. The 2000s arrived, then the 2010s. Dothan kept living. The city grew. New neighborhoods went up. Children who were born after 1999 grew up knowing nothing about JB Beasley and Tracie Hawlett except the names they heard from adults. Names that carried weight without context. Life in the Wiregrass continued. Football seasons came and went. New schools were built. The roads that JB and Tracie had driven down that night were repaved. The big little store changed hands. But for Carol Roberts and Cheryl Bergen, time did not work that way. For these 2 mothers, time did not pass. It accumulated. Year after year, like layers of sediment pressing down on a wound that would not heal and would not close and would not let them sleep through July 31st without waking up and reliving it. The payphone, the last words, the black Mazda turning right into the darkness. Every year on JB's birthday, the birthday she never came home from, those images were as fresh and as sharp as they had been the morning of August 1st, 1999. The case file at the Ozark Police Department remained officially open. The semen DNA sample was carefully stored in the lab. the only biological thread connecting the present to the killer. Year after year, investigators ran it against the Cody's criminal database as it expanded, hoping for a hit. 2005, no match. 2010, no match. 2015, still nothing. The killer had no criminal record, no arrest history, no reason to be in any system. Cody's only held DNA from people who had been convicted of crimes, and this man had never been convicted of anything. As far as the databases were concerned, he simply didn't exist. The case became one of the most well-known cold cases in Alabama history. Anniversary articles every 5 years. True crime forums. Conversations among Dothan residents every time summer came back around and the humid Alabama heat stirred up old memories. But remembering didn't mean solving it. 20 years passed. Two mothers grew older, grayer, more tired, but they never stopped asking the same question. Who killed my daughter? April 2018, the entire country stopped and stared at a news story out of California. Joseph James D'Angelo, known as the Golden State Killer, had just been arrested. A man responsible for at least 13 murders and more than 50 sexual assaults across California during the 1970s and 80s. He had evaded capture for more than 40 years. And he hadn't been caught through traditional investigation. He was caught through something that had never been used in American criminal justice history before. Something called genetic genealogy. Here's how it works, and I want you to pay close attention to this, because it's the key to everything that happens next. Traditional DNA databases like Cody's only contain DNA from people who have been arrested or convicted of crimes. If your suspect has a clean record, Cody's can't help you. But genetic genealogy doesn't search for the suspect. It searches for the suspect's family. Investigators ran D'Angelo's crime scene DNA through a public genealogy website called GEDmatch, a platform where millions of ordinary people had voluntarily uploaded their own DNA to research their ancestry and find distant relatives. The crime scene DNA produced partial matches, not to the killer himself, but to his distant relatives who had uploaded their own DNA. From those partial matches, investigators built family trees, working backward from distant cousins, narrowing to closer relatives, cross-referencing with age, geography, physical description, until the tree narrowed to a single individual who fit every piece of the picture, Joseph James D'Angelo, living quietly in a suburb outside Sacramento. When law enforcement in Ozark, Alabama followed the D'Angelo arrest, Police Chief Mosley Walker watched the story with a very specific attention because he was thinking about a file in his own office, a semen DNA sample, 2 17-year-old girls. A case that had been open for nearly 20 years with no meaningful progress. He picked up the phone and called Parabon Nanolabs, the private DNA testing company that had played a key role in the D'Angelo case. He sent them the 1999 crime scene sample and asked them to do what they had done in California. Find me the family, then narrow it down, stay with me, because the name that came back from that lab, after 20 years of silence, is someone that nobody in this investigation ever saw. And I mean that in a way that is going to hit you differently than you expect. Parabon Nanolabs ran the analysis. They uploaded the 1999 crime scene DNA to GEDmatch, identified partial matches with Alabama families, and began building family trees, working outward from distant relatives and narrowing inward toward a single individual who fit all the geographic and biological criteria. The results came back with a list of names. Chief Walker read through that list, and he stopped at one, Coley McCraney. 45 years old, born and raised in the Dothan, Ozark area, a long-haul truck driver by profession. In the same community where JB Beasley and Tracie Hawlett had grown up, been killed, and been mourned for 20 years, a pastor at a local church. He had a wife named Jeanette, 2 children, a life, no criminal record, no police contact. Not a single flag in any system, anywhere in 20 years. In the community, Coley McCraney was simply a familiar face. A man neighbors chatted with in their front yards. Someone people sat near in church without a second thought. A man who, if you asked anyone in Dothan about him, would generate nothing but a shrug and a few unremarkable words. Nice enough guy. Never any trouble. That was exactly why his DNA had never been in the criminal database. That was exactly how he had stayed invisible for 2 decades. Chief Walker knew him from his school days. And now Walker had to get McCraney's DNA without tipping him off. Because if you approach a potential murder suspect directly and tell him you think he's a killer, one of 2 things happens. He lawyers up, or he runs, neither helps you. So Walker did something far more careful. He invited McCraney to the station for a friendly conversation. Framed it as asking for help from a local resident. 2 people who had known each other since high school, talking through a cold case. Walker looked him in the eye and said, "You are not a suspect. I just need your DNA so we can eliminate people and find the person we're really looking for." Coley McCraney agreed. His wife, Jeanette, sat right beside him in that meeting. She had no reason to suspect anything, no reason to refuse. She encouraged her husband to cooperate. And Coley McCraney sat there, calm, as an officer ran a buccal swab along the inside of his cheek. What he didn't know, what neither he nor Jeanette knew, was that the family tree Parabon Nanolabs had built from the crime scene DNA had already pointed directly at him before he ever walked through that door. The swab was a formality. The test results came back. Coley McCraney's DNA was an exact match to the semen sample collected from JB Beasley's body on August 1, 1999. The sample that had sat in a lab for nearly 20 years. When confronted with the results, McCraney denied everything. He said he had never met JB Beasley. He had never met Tracie Hawlett. He was not in Ozark on the night of July 31, 1999. He knew nothing. On March 15, 2019, nearly 20 years to the day after JB and Tracie pulled out of that parking lot and disappeared into the night, Coley McCraney was arrested on multiple counts of capital murder and rape. Prosecutors announced immediately they would seek the death penalty, and Dothan and Ozark were shaken in a way that is hard to put into words, not because the case had finally been solved after 2 decades. Not because DNA technology had accomplished what 20 years of traditional investigation could not, though both of those things were staggering on their own. The shock came from the name, Coley McCraney, a pastor, a father, a truck driver, a neighbor, a man whose face was familiar in that community because he had been there the whole time. Attending church, going to work, raising his children, growing older, while Carol Roberts and Cheryl Bergen sat in their homes waiting. People in Dothan and Ozark had passed this man on the road, nodded to him, maybe exchanged a few words about football or the weather. Some of them had probably sat just rows away from him in a church pew. Not one person, not even law enforcement, across 20 years of investigation, had ever thought of Coley McCraney. It wasn't just surprise, it was the slow, nauseating realization of what that meant. He had been here, living normally. The entire time, Carol Roberts, Tracie's mother, heard the news of the arrest and couldn't speak for several minutes. Cheryl Bergen, JB's mother, cried. These 2 women had waited 2 decades for a name. They had never stopped waiting, never stopped pushing, never stopped asking the question. And now, at last, they had it. But the answer did not bring relief. Not yet, because an arrest is not a conviction. There was still a trial to come, and it would take another 4 years to get there. The trial was supposed to begin in 2020. Then COVID-19 hit and shut down courthouses across the country. Proceedings were delayed, then delayed again. For Carol Roberts and Cheryl Bergen, it meant 4 more years of waiting on top of the 20 that had already passed. It wasn't until April 2023, 24 years after the night JB and Tracie were murdered on or near Herring Avenue, that the trial officially opened in Dale County, Alabama. Judge William Fillmore presided. Coley McCraney, now 49 years old, sat at the defense table facing 4 counts of capital murder and 1 count of rape. In the gallery, in the row reserved for victims' families, Carol Roberts and Cheryl Bergen sat together. The trial lasted 8 days, dozens of witnesses, extensive physical and forensic evidence. Intense, opposing arguments from 2 legal teams who had been preparing for this moment for years. And then, Coley McCraney made a decision that surprised nearly everyone in that courtroom. He chose to take the stand himself. That is always a high-risk move in a criminal trial, because once a defendant takes the stand, they are subject to full cross-examination from the prosecution. No protection, no selective answers. Whatever the other side asks, you have to respond. McCraney took that risk, and on the stand, he told a story that was completely different from his flat denial in 2019. He now claimed he had met JB Beasley at a shopping mall in Dothan several months before the night of the crime. She had introduced herself as Jennifer. They exchanged phone numbers. They stayed in contact, and they had planned to meet up in Ozark on the night of July 31st. According to McCraney, his truck broke down that night due to a bad alternator at a gas station. He happened to see JB and Tracie at the payphone. He approached them, purely by chance, he said, and the 2 girls offered to drive him to where his truck was parked. In the cab of his truck, he and JB had consensual sex. Afterward, the girls dropped him off at home around 12:45 a.m., and he knew nothing more about what happened to them after that. As for why he had denied everything in 2019, denied even knowing the girls at all, he said he was afraid. Afraid his wife would find out about the affair. The prosecution took that story apart piece by piece. There were no text messages between McCraney and JB, no phone records, no witnesses to any prior meeting. Nothing, not a single piece of evidence. to confirm that JB Beasley and Coley McCraney had ever spoken before July 31st, 1999. Marilyn Merritt, the woman who had met the two girls at the Big Little store that night, took the stand and said clearly, JB and Tracie were simply lost teenagers trying to find their way home. There was no indication of any planned meeting. No sign that either girl was expecting to see anyone that night. Tracie's phone called her mother at 11:35 p.m. confirmed the same thing. They were on their way home, not heading toward a rendezvous. Using the physical evidence, the mud on Tracie's shoes, the wet pant legs, the position of the bodies in the trunk, the shell casing, the semen, the prosecution reconstructed what had actually happened after JB and Tracie left that parking lot. McCraney approached their car, forced them at gunpoint to drive to another location, an area with bushes and wet ground which explained the mud and the briars. He raped JB. Then he shot both girls with a 9mm handgun. He placed their bodies in the trunk, Tracie first, JB second. He drove the car to Herring Avenue, and he left it there. Then he went home and lived his life for 20 years. But now, the most dramatic moment of the entire 8-day trial. The prosecution called their final witness, Jeanette McCraney, the wife. The same woman who had sat beside her husband in 2019 when Walker asked him for his DNA. The same woman who had encouraged him to cooperate, who had no reason to suspect anything, who had trusted this man for more than 2 decades. She took the oath, she sat in the witness box, and she testified. Jeanette McCraney told the court that on the night of July 31st, 1999, her husband had gone out, and he had not come home for a period of time that he had never been able to satisfactorily explain to her. The woman who had unknowingly helped police obtain the evidence that would convict her husband, who had sat beside him and told him to cooperate, was now the witness that sealed his fate. It was one of the most quietly devastating moments in the entire case. On April 25, 2023, after 8 days of trial, the jury retired to deliberate. On April 26, 2023, they came back. Coley McCraney, guilty on all 4 counts of capital murder. The murder of JB Beasley during the commission of rape. The murder of Tracie Hawlett during the same criminal event. The murder of both victims during the same course of conduct. And the use of JB's Mazda 929 as part of the criminal act, which under Alabama law constitutes a separate capital charge. The following day, the jury reconvened to decide on the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Not the death penalty prosecutors had originally sought, but life without parole, meaning Coley McCraney, 49 years old, would never walk out of a prison gate for the rest of his life. When the verdict was read aloud in the Dale County courtroom, Carol Roberts couldn't speak for several minutes. She later said, "I'm stunned. We waited 24 years and finally someone is being held accountable." Cheryl Bergen, JB's mother, leaned forward and broke down in uncontrollable tears. Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall, who personally prosecuted the case, stood before the press after the verdict and said, "We lost 2 precious girls who never had the chance to grow up and experience life." He acknowledged openly that the sentence did not bring complete closure. No verdict could do that. But it answered the question that 2 families had carried like a nameless weight for 24 years. Coley McCraney is currently serving his sentence at William Donaldson Correctional Facility in Bessemer, Alabama. From prison, in a phone interview with ABC News, he continued to proclaim his innocence, saying people could call him a cheater, but he did not kill anyone. The case of JB Beasley and Tracie Hawlett was one of the first in the United States to prove, definitively, that genetic genealogy could solve a cold case under conditions where every traditional method had failed completely. No criminal record, no reliable eyewitnesses. No physical evidence except a single DNA sample stored in a laboratory for 20 years, 1 sample, 20 years, and a technology that didn't exist when those 2 girls were killed. After the McCraney conviction, law enforcement agencies across the country took notice. Hundreds of cold cases were reopened using the same genetic genealogy approach. Families who had long since given up on ever receiving answers, who had stopped expecting the phone to ring, started getting calls. One solved case became a template, and that template became a movement. Every family that finally got a name after 5 years, 10 years, 30 years of silence, that is part of the legacy of this case. Part of what JB and Tracie, in a quiet and painful way, helped build simply by having people who loved them and refused to stop fighting. Carol Roberts never stopped. Cheryl Bergen never stopped. And because they didn't, because they kept the case alive every year on every anniversary, kept talking to investigators, kept that DNA sample from being forgotten, a 45-year-old pastor and truck driver with no criminal record was sitting in a Dale County courtroom in 2023 with nowhere left to hide. Before I close out this episode, I want to talk to you directly for a moment. Because this case left behind lessons, real, practical lessons that JB and Tracie's story makes painfully clear. First, always share a specific itinerary before you go out. Not just "I'm going to a party," the exact location, the name of the host number, your expected time home, and if plans change, call immediately. Tracie did call from Ozark. But if someone had known exactly where they were heading and when they were expected, those 2 hours might have been caught sooner. Second, in the age of smartphones, there is no reason to get lost without anyone knowing where you are. Turn on real-time location sharing with at least one trusted person before you drive somewhere unfamiliar, especially at night. Third, if you are ever lost and need to stop somewhere after dark, stay in the car, lock the doors, use your phone. Do not get out to ask a stranger for help if you can avoid it. Fourth, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, if a situation feels off, even when you can't explain exactly why, drive away. Call 911. Go somewhere crowded. You do not owe anyone an explanation. And fifth, this case is a reminder that dangerous people do not look dangerous. They can be your neighbor, your pastor, someone you've seen 100 times. Vigilance is not paranoia. It is something that can save your life. JB Beasley was 17 years old. She was a cheerleader, an honor student, a daughter her mother called a beautiful gift. Tracie Hawlett was her best friend, the kind of best friend who is simply always there, no matter what. They got lost on a birthday night in the summer of 1999. They made a phone call to say they were on their way home. They never made it. But their story, and the two mothers who refused to stop carrying it, helped change the way America pursues justice for the voiceless. If this episode moved you, please share it. Not for the views, but because JB and Tracie deserve to be remembered beyond a file number. And because one share from you might be what helps someone out there get home safely tonight. What's the weather like where you are right now? And tell me in the comments, did you see that ending coming? I'm your host. This has been Reopened Records. I'll see you in the next one.